think I got it working. Okay. Who invented the steam engine?
James Watt.
Yeah. And what part of the United States was really good for coal and iron and then oil too?
Mid-Atlantic.
Yeah, New York, Pennsylvania. So, just so you know, it looks like Vice President Biden is now over the top. I thought it might happen yesterday, but it came close. Look how close Georgia is still. They got still maybe 20,000 votes to count. Most of them going to Biden, probably.
Look, it's. Oh, I want more decimal places on that because that irks me.
Yeah, because well, they're only a couple thousand apart.
Yeah.
And then not even that, 1,500. And then this is, it's going to be probably, they still got like 100,000. So Biden's going to end up being owned by probably 100,000. Arizona is probably out of reach. And Nevada. So probably call it. I don't think President Trump's going to concede, but it doesn't matter.
You know, saying victory on the first night of election isn't really the best thing you can do as a president, but not to get political.
It does lead to, I think our country is very unstable right now.
Even more of
Say the
a
least. We are, let's put it this way, things were a lot more stable when I was your age. It's definitely not near as stable. It's much more near a tipping point. Hopefully it tips to better and more stability. All right? Sure. That's it. Come on. Come on. Come on. Close. You can't do it. On the other hand, let's go.
I don't think you just there at all. I can move it like up and down, and that's it. I can't.
Does he got that? Oh yeah. We just snap it in there.
I don't have three-dimensional movement with my finger. I have to physically.
Oh really?
I can't move.
I guess it's better than this finger being like that. So we got that. Oh, and what's that system where they have a very heavily regimented workforce? Where they live in dorms and they try to regiment every part of their lives. What was that called? What was the name? It was named after the Massachusetts city. Do we have it?
Lowell.
Yeah, the Lowell system. My mask is falling down. This was not the mask I meant to grab. This morning now I'm a big thing of mask. And I grabbed the one that's not good for teaching, but that's the way it goes, right? And Morse, did we get right to Morse?
We covered sewing machine, got onto Morse, yeah.
More, and what's this thing, by the way?
Cotton gin.
Yeah, that's cotton gin. And innovation breeds innovation. We got James Watt. I'll ask a couple questions. Let's go ahead then and get to this Morse. So we talked about Morse code, right? Did SOS. And I'll tell you real quick, there's two big things that came out of the telegraph. I mean, we can see all kinds of things, but make sure we get these two things out for Morse. The spread of news and information. Just overnight, you could get up-to-date prices, up-to-date news. It changed people's attitudes about the world they live in, brought things closer together. I mean, you could get news from Washington, D.C. on that day. And, in 30 years, they're going to have underground telegraph between the United States and London. And so, after the Civil War. So it's remarkable how close the world came. And the other thing is this, and this is to what we're talking about even more important. It allowed multiple businesses to be controlled from one location. Does that make sense? Multiple businesses, one location. So remember we mentioned about the Middle Atlantic and all those iron and mills started forming near where the coal was? Well, before the telegraph, if you ran one of these companies, you had to be there all the time. But now they can start running it from New York City, which is the financial capital, and allow you to gather more money and more finance, which is going to become even bigger than the actual business themselves. And this allows companies to get bigger. And that's the key. Telegraph allowed for big. And then we mentioned the cotton gin. We'll come back to the cotton gin. 2 more bits of innovation we got to get to. We're shaking up above. John Deere. John Deere invented, and this is the Smithsonian, you can see the original steel tip plow there. I have a picture somewhere in all my photos, but I can't find it in one I took, so I can steal it. But steel tip plow. The plow would not dull. And that would make John Deere and his company very big. I know we think of tractors, we hear John Deere, but that's his company would expand. But here's the plow that made the difference. It could cut through the hard dirt of the Great Plains. Here's the plow, and this would scour the dirt off. So as it would move, you'd every once in a while just kind of pull back on this handle, and this will go against the plow, get the dirt off, so get a nice clean cut. You'd ride here, and it'd be pulled by horses here, 1 or 2 horses. And that's the plow. But the other one is even bigger, even a bigger invention. Cyrus McCormick, right here, the mechanical reaper. The reaper. Which would have been a great Halloween costume. The reaper. A reaper that's cutting down of, let's say, wheat and then taking the corn or the seed off. This reaper could do the work of 10, then 20 people. This would change everything. So it cut the stalks right here, be pulled by horses, cut the stalks here, and to go into this, they called it a hopper. And the stalks would beat around this because they would turn, and the corn, the grain would fall to the bottom, and the stalks would shoot off the back. If you're at a combine, all a combine is a big version of a reaper. Pulled by a horse. Do the work of 10 people, so that means one person can now reap 10 times the amount. Is this good or bad for farmers? Huh? You see, when you first think about it, oh yeah, more food, that's great. Is that kind of your first instinct? But you start thinking about, wait a second, how are they going to get this? Don't they have to go into debt to buy this? And if every other farmer is buying one of these, what happens to the amount of food produced? Production goes up. And if more food is produced, what happens to the price? Price drops. All it takes is one bad year and you never pay back your debt. So you talk about who has the money? This would be good for overall production. The beginning of the end of small farmers. You get this done. McCormick would be the beginning of the end. You think tractors are good for farmers? Yeah, for an individual, if you have a tractor, but it hurts small farmers. And small farmers in the 1920s, you've heard of the Great Depression. The Great Depression for farmers actually began in the 1920s, and they never recovered. And now there's virtually no small farmers. Virtually none. When I mean that, I mean somebody who makes their sole living on a small farm. A small farm in Montana is like a section, which is huge, 1 by 1 mile square, a massive farm. And there's something else this would do. Families would change. Before the Industrial Revolution, you needed a lot of kids. If you're a farmer, what were kids for? To work the farm. You don't need as many kids. What do you do with them? I mean, literally, what do you do with them? Go to the city. This is dramatically going to change families, farms. The Industrial Revolution changes everything, and that's just one example. Innovation on top of innovation leads to dramatic changes. And so number 8 then. The United States is just beginning this. Why here? Why do we have a system that allows for this whole interchangeable parts? This American system of industry. But don't forget, I also told you that Henry Clay wanted a national program to help industry. That was really unusual. Why here? Why did it not happen in France, even though France was much more wealthy and advanced than the primitive United States was in the 1790s? Okay, they had a revolution. And it developed differently in Germany. Why did it develop elsewhere? Well, number 1, demand. Demand, that's people wanting to buy goods. No one's going to start a business, and especially no one's going to hire workers if they don't think they're going to sell their product. Workers are hired because the company thinks they can make more money from their labor. And why do the United States have more demand? The United States had the largest middle, or what they called then middling class, middle class. Now, Americans like to think of themselves as a middle class country today, but that's not the correct definition. Middle is not like the median, like the actual middle income. It's not that. The middle is, well, there's basically two classes, the biggest class. The biggest class are working class, and then a tiny upper class. The middle class is between them. And there are people who like the working class. They have to work. They have to work to survive. Everyone got, they have to work, but they can afford luxuries. Has everyone got that? That's middle class. Maybe it might help you to write that down, because that's something I know there's a good chance you'll forget. They can afford some of the luxuries. Those luxuries that upper class people can afford. But they don't necessarily have to work in the upper class. Middle class, they have to have that job, so like a clerk or some kind of professional. Now they can afford these without going into a great amount of debt. And the debt's the big thing. So like at that time, if you're middle class, you could afford a house, maybe a stable for a wagon and a horse. A big thing is if you're middle class, you had a servant. Servant was a big sign of middle class. Or fine porcelain, China. Remember I told you about what China was. Things like that, that's middle class. A few of those things, and you don't have to go into a great amount of debt. Today, someone who's truly middle class, they can buy a house, one, maybe two, maybe three cars, and not go into a huge amount of debt. Maybe send their children to college without a huge amount of debt. That's middle class. The vast majority of people are working class. They have just barely enough to survive, and to buy some of those luxuries, they got to go into a lot of debt. And therefore, most people are actually working people. We'd like to think of ourselves, but very few people can go and buy a house and just put cash down. You know, put down $250,000 or $300,000 and buy a house. Some can. Most can't buy a car and do that. Just the way it is. And so the thing about it is, though, that means there's a relatively big hunk, about 10 to 11% of the population by 1840, who buy stuff. It's bigger than anybody else. And the reason I put this graph up here is that's actually the richest 1%. And it goes from 1800 to 2010. It's by this economist named Timothy Piketty, who's done very big work on inequalities of wealth. And this goes 20, 30, 40. And you can see in these older European countries where wealth was focused to the top, look at Britain. Especially when capitalism hit, 70% of the wealth was in the top 1%. If 70% of the wealth is in the top 1% of the population, that means the bottom 99% only have 30% of the wealth. That means how much can they buy? How much can they buy? This hurts demand a lot. And you might think, well, won't they buy more? No. I mean, how many houses can a person buy? They only buy a few, right? But you have a few million sitting around. How many houses are you going to buy? The US, it wasn't as unequal. So even at the height of what's called the Gilded Age, and wealth was 40% of the top 1%, that means 60% of the wealth is on the bottom, so they can buy more. Just so you know, what was the big shift here? Yeah, Great Depression. And after the Great Depression, what happened is almost every country adopted what's called Keynesian or liberal economics. And that was to try to redistribute wealth or try to have wealth flow, not wealth go to the top, but wealth go to working people. With the idea being that will increase demand, and also hopefully if working people feel better about their lives, they won't become either fascist or communist. Because that's what happened between World War I and World War II. The growth of fascism and a very totalitarian version of communism. And so you see how the wealth really went down at the top 1%. Beginning in 1980, it began to slowly go up again because the US went away from those policies. And now it is going up at the fastest it's ever gone up. The last figure I saw was 2015, and it was about here for the top 1%. And my guess after COVID, it's going to be someplace up here. Because wealth is just to the top 200 or 300 people. And whatever you can say, whatever you think about that being fair or not, The point is that means there's less money for people on the bottom of the box line. We have a demand issue coming up. It's happening in your lifetime. But that's why the United States. Why am I telling you that? We have many of the same issues that happened now. So we can look to what happened then and predict what might happen now. And if you get inequalities of wealth like this, you might get a Great Depression. Next, shortage of labor. And when I mean shortage of labor, everybody write down skilled labor. A shortage of skilled labor. Skilled craftsmen or artisans were doing all the major work from making muskets to puddling steel. That's what we call it, puddling and bubble and gurgle. Puddle. Or coopers and making barrels. I mean, we go on and on. These skilled craftsmen. Well, there weren't very many in the US. And so what happened was this. There weren't as many skilled laborers mad that machines were taking their jobs. Has everyone got that? Machines are going to take jobs, but there weren't skilled workers to get mad yet. In France, they had all these skilled laborers who fought like hell to keep their jobs. And so there was a resistance against them. And there's a lot of poor there. The United States didn't have the same issue. So machines could come in. And if there's a shortage of labor, wages go up a little bit. So more demand. Next. Capital. Do you remember capital was the means of production? Well, fuel's one of the most important ones. You got to power your factory. And the United States had immense resources of food and fuel that European countries, nobody competed with, at least at first. The US had a lot of fast-moving streams, acres, millions of acres of forest, that the US would cut almost all of it down. They cut down 97% of the forest between 1800 and 1900, cut it all down. The US had immense resources of coal, and then going into the 20th century, oil. If there's a lot of it, that means fuel prices are low because of capital. That gave the United States companies a competitive advantage because of the low price of capital. And going into the 20th century, when petroleum became even more important, the US had lots of petroleum. Britain, France, Germany, Japan, most of Europe, almost no petroleum. That gave the US a huge advantage. Huge advantage. No, they did not totally get the economic impact of that. Even though, about the 1880s, they could tell. Yeah, we're spewing carbon into the air. That's when they first theorized about the greenhouse effect, 1880s. So if you want to know, as the climate changed and I hear people, well, no one would have thought it. No, they did. They were really smart. Next, lastly, education. The United States had the most educated workforce in the world. Literacy rates as high as 90% in the North of men and women by 1840. In the South, it was probably 70% of white men. The South always had a lower education tradition that's also had to do with taxation and more rural. But one thing about an educated workforce, if you're well educated and do get this done, you can adapt faster. You can adapt to change faster. You're in school and you're constantly getting new. Constantly. You're taught to adapt. You're taught that change is normal. To adapt to changing conditions, new classes, new units. You think about it, isn't it always something new? Or at least relatively new. Now, here's the thing about education, though, it's so much different. At this time, the United States began adopting public education with the goal of universal education, meaning every child, every person will have access to public education. This is a massive expenditure. The first country in the world to do this. Other places had great schools, great centers of learning and knowledge, but most people couldn't get it. The United States opened this up. Now, when I got 90% of the people could read and write, we're talking what we'd say a primary or grammar school education. They really didn't go on much past what we would consider like 5th and 6th grade. Most people, but still, that was above anybody else. I mean, they got the 3 R's. You know the 3 R's, don't you? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. And Horace Mann, so get his name down, Horace Mann, would be the most famous education reformer. And in some ways, he was just revolutionary. And in some ways, he was pretty dictatorial. But his ideas will lead to this basic lyceum or school model of students in a class being taught by highly motivated teachers. And I love this one, since it's kind of expensive. We're all doing math together, and there's an abacus. I just love that picture. That's a really cool picture. They have it up here so all the students can see it, and they're moving it by little ropes and pulleys. Here's a class from about the turn of the century with the wonderful chalkboards. You guys have a class with chalkboards? When I first started, I had one chalkboard and a grease board. Kind of fun to get scratched. I miss that. But it also, your hand would just get so dried out, just puckered, and almost like the skin would crack and bleed with chalk. Sound good? You have no sympathy, don't you? No, not even a little bit. But there's universal education, and that was the goal. No, not everyone had education, and certainly people were left out. But once you set that as your goal, then eventually you would get to that point. And the big thing about education was what Horace Mann, he thought education had two roles. Two roles. Number one, so get this first one down. Number one, and this was what he thought most important, good citizens. Good citizens in a republic. Thinking, independent-minded people that can not only choose the best leaders, but to be involved in the decisions that these leaders will make that will affect every part of our lives. So understand government. And one thing he really emphasized was history. Because there's absolutely no way that you have any idea, can make any prediction about the future unless you know history. Because if you try to predict the future without knowing anything about what happened, you're just in fantasy. And I'll tell you right now, there's a lot of people, you might know them, you might be in it yourself, are in fantasy. You know, they have no idea, and they just kind of like evolve this whole world about what's going on. There's a lot of people. And if you don't believe me, just look how many people believe these outlandish conspiracy theories. That's because people just don't know. But that's number one. Number two, not as important, but productive members of society. Now, when he thought productive members, he thought they would work, they would be the creators, the inventors, that produce goods, create what we would consider today economic growth. But other people might take this and remember what I told you yesterday. Productive members in society, that means people in school are being taught to do what? What? Say it again, I can't. Yeah, so obey. So I thought you did something else. I went, that doesn't make sense. Obey, follow the bells, right? Look at the clock. And so that's a problem when you try to teach people to be factory workers and obey, and then thinking, questioning independent members of society. Aren't they in opposition? And this is a fight in education all the time. What do we want? Students to become good workers or good citizens? They're not always the same. In fact, a lot of times they compete. And that's why I teach history, and I get people who will ask me, you know, why do you teach history? I mean, because what does that do for making a living? And I never know how to answer that, because to me it's just such a dumb question. So I don't know how to answer because I don't want to insult them. But it's like, that's how you get citizens. And if you start a business, don't you need to know the history about what's being sold? You got to know these things. We are the sum of our parts. But that's Horace Mann. Oh, I mentioned this already. Citizen work. So we got that. So speaking of that, let's get to a test from elementary school, and I took this. Do you get it? Do you get it? Do you see it? What's the joke? I thought that was funny. Okay, so 9, capitalism. This new economic system is being created, and They're in proto-capitalism. But capitalism is kind of a market economy. And a lot of the ideas of capitalism come from one man, so we have to mention it, Adam Smith. Now, this is his book. Don't write down the whole title. Only write down, everyone calls it The Wealth of Nations. But the theory of moral sentiments and an inquiry to the nature of causes of the wealth of nations. Book titles back in the 18th century were very long. And there are no grammatical rules. And so you might get a sentence that's literally a page long. It's really weird to write. He's a good author. A lot of people quote Adam Smith today. They haven't necessarily read Adam Smith. Great influence, but he's very misunderstood. Very misunderstood. So that's him. He, in many ways, is also called the father of economics. He was just called a philosopher. Have you ever see the green poster over there? That's Adam Smith. Perpetually looking north, as he must always look north. Don't look at this picture, just look at that one. And a couple things about Adam Smith. First off, Adam Smith emphasized, when he was talking about how people, he was obsessed about people buying and sell goods. What the hell is that? Did this happen last week too? Or just that on, no, it was on Tuesday. Must be doing the same garbage. On Tuesday, also, there's all these, I think it's science. Them up there. It's going to come down on our head. Everyone, earthquake drill under the desk. You don't even care. I'll just use the styrofoam. See? That was impressive, wasn't it? Okay, so he talked about a free market. Notice I put in quotes. And the market is a place, or really like just like a store, but the exchange of goods, the buying and selling, the production and marketing of goods. And I don't mean all goods, I mean one good. So it could be cars, staplers, paper towels. I'm looking at things in front of me. Lids with hammer time on it, or of course, frozen concentrated orange juice. That is a market, the buying and selling of it. So that's what he means by a market. So it's not just where you go like give money and get something back. It's the whole production of it, getting the raw materials, and then somebody buying it who goes through the process of finding the best product for themselves at the price they can afford. That's the market. And as he said, the markets that function best have two elements in it. First off, competition. And you automatically see this concept of different sellers competing to get people to buy their products. But also, if you're going to go buy something, you're competing with other consumers to buy that product. I mean, if you guys both want to buy this beautiful lid with hammer time on it, what does that do to the price? You bid it up. The price goes up. So you're in competition. Start the bidding now. Start the bidding at $1,000. Let's go. You guys don't know quality. And self-interest. You're always going to operate in your best interest. And that's what he said, what operates fundamentally in a market. All things being equal, everybody goes to the store, or every business leader, let's start with the business leader. They start producing goods, they're always going to make the best decisions on supply and product. They're going to sell the best product. They're going to produce goods that people want at a price they can afford. And if they don't, they go out of business. They will always make the best decision because you're operating in your own self-interest. And the same thing with consumers. You're going to go out and buy products that at a price you can afford, at a product that you need, and a product that won't kill you. Does that make sense? You're not going to buy a product on purpose that will kill you. And therefore, everybody operates rationally with self-interest in a competition. And that's why I put quotes on there. Because already this is falling out. It doesn't happen that way at all, does it? People operate weirdly in competition, and you don't always operate in your best self-interest. People buy products all the time that kill them. All the time. All the time. And that by definition is irrational. Can you give me an example? Have you heard of cigarettes? People buy them all the time. Or now, I mean, the vaping thing is unreal. They have no idea what that's doing to their lungs, and people do that. No idea. It appears to be destroying lungs because you're sucking in metals that are forming at the bottom. What are the little sacs in your lungs? Aluvia, is that right? You want to talk about little air sacs in your lungs? Just act like you agree, right? And it's filling those with particles, and it's killing people. The people buy them all the time. We can go on and on and on. Or I'm going to get to the store and I need to go 70. So with that. So one more thing. That means there's risk. You start a business, you might go out of business and lose everything. You buy a product and it might injure you. And so there is risk involved. And so that's the main element of the market. So Adam Smith is looking at this and saying, okay, what will make it function better? He stole this from a couple Arab philosophers, but remember Jefferson stole the Declaration of Independence. So that's what he came up with. Okay, so if you have a market of selling frozen concentrated orange juice, the price and everything will be set in the market. And what is the market? Put an arrow. This interaction of supply and demand. That's really what the market is. The interaction of supply and demand. That will set the price. That will set the production. And if you ever take an economics class, the first day you'll get a graph like this generic supply and demand curve. It's not very accurate. This is idealized. This is not real world. But this generic, just to get the idea of what they're talking about here. And supply. If the price is low, you're not going to produce very much. If the price goes up, production goes up. What it means is this. If all of a sudden all these people want a product you sell, frozen concentrated orange juice. If you're a company, won't you produce more? But there's something else. If my company's making frozen concentrated orange juice, and we're making money hand over fist, other people outside would begin to think, what? I should sell frozen concentrated orange juice. And that encourages more supply. Demand, same deal. Price is really high, people don't buy as much. As the price drops, people buy more. And so there has to be some interaction. And what we have is an equilibrium. It's not set in stone. Something where enough companies went into the marketplace that they'll set a price where they can still make money and produce their goods that people will buy. If too many companies enter the market, they go out of business. You produce a bad product, you go out of business. And this equilibrium will be set. Adam Smith said, in the idealized world, it will just happen. And he had a name for it. And put this in your notes, underline it, the invisible hand of the market. This invisible hand will set the price. You might have even heard this term before, the invisible hand. And this is the idealized version, it'll set the price. Because if all of a sudden prices get too high, people won't buy, companies go out of business, or vice versa. Price is too low, people might buy it, but you don't make money. Invisible hand. So this is what it's looking at this. Okay, this is how we sell goods, buy goods. And so, why do people start a business? It's called profit margin. You've probably heard the term marginal profit. Profit margin is what really matters. Profit margin is the difference between your revenues. So that's the amount of money you bring in versus cost. Heck, you might sell a lot and bring a lot of money in, but if your costs are so high, you don't make any money. You want your revenues to be way above your cost, and then that in the middle, profit. Now, when I say that, that's obviously, you say, of course, that's obviously what business is. But if we're in an idealized situation where supply and demand is created by the invisible hand, what's really the only thing you can control if you start a business? The revenues or cost? What's the only thing you can control? Say it again. No, but your choices are revenues or cost. Yeah, cost. So circle of cost, it's the only thing you control. So that is your product. The only thing you control is cost. You drop your cost, higher marginal profit. Here's the biggie. You drop your cost, can't you drop your price and therefore undercut your competitors? And so we're talking about pre-capitalism Adam Smith thinking, okay, what is the best way to produce more goods, more technological change? We got to figure out ways to get the cost down. So what did he come up with? Strange engravings of people making cloth. Division of labor. Division of labor. And the division of labor is this. You have, instead of one person trying to do every skill, you try to do all the different skills. Here it's making cloth. And so here we have, they're making thread. There's making thread. He is weaving right here. If you try to do all of that, you won't be good at any one thing. But if you do just the spinning, and then this is also weaving too, over and over again, you become really good at that one job. If you become really good, you become more efficient. You work faster, and your costs drop. Division of labor means your costs drop. Adam Smith used the example of pins. When I mean pins, I mean like sewing pins. And today you might not think that's a big deal, but think how hard it would be to make a pin from scratch. We could not do it anymore. We couldn't do it, not even close. Because you'd have to get the iron and a few other products. You have to make steel, so you have to know how to puddle steel, have to make a mold that won't melt, know exactly how to pour and work with that kind of heat, to open the mold so it doesn't break and crack into 1,000 pieces. The only thing we could do is probably file the edges of the pin to make it a little bit more usable. That's all we could do. If you try to do every one of those tasks, you couldn't do it. We have somebody do from the mining to the puddling of steel, do all that, become faster and faster and faster and more efficient. Now you might be thinking, okay, thanks for the little economic lessons. How's this relate to the Industrial Revolution? If division of labor allows you to cut costs, what does a machine do? Wouldn't a machine work a lot faster and more efficient than any person? And the answer is yes. Machines. And the term we have to know is productivity. Productivity goes up if you specialize. Productivity is the amount of output per person. It's not amount that like how hard someone works. It just means you have a company of 1,000 people, how much does that company produce per person? Productivity. Productivity is everything. Productivity. Because if you can get more output per laborer, that's more profit because your costs drop. Machines can drop costs after the initial expenditure. And so that's the key. And therefore, this is what Adam Smith said. Let competition and self-interest guide this. Everyone got that? Let competition and self-interest guide this. Then they guide production. And that will come up with the best product at the best price and let the invisible hand do it. Let competition guide production. Therefore, you'll come up with the best product. And your self-interest will be to make a good product so people buy it. But the problem was this. When Adam Smith wrote this, I didn't tell you the year he wrote this, did I? Please write down the year Adam Smith wrote this. 1776. The same year as independence for the United States. Kind of a big year. Government was creating monopolies. So what he said was laissez-faire. Laissez-faire was hands off by government. Because governments were only supporting monopolies. Remember mercantilism and the Tea Act? If government doesn't support just one company, that will encourage competition. And that's what laissez-faire means. Hands off by government. And therefore, will lead to competition and more production. And that's what Adam Smith said. But it's still idealized. He's talking about a free market when all this happens. How many times in the history of the world has there been a free market? Anybody want to guess? It's easy to guess. It's round and hollow. Never. So he's talking about an idealized world. By the way, I'll tell you why, really very quickly, why I come up with the term government. When I was in college, many, many years ago. My summer job was delivering beer. Good summer job. Not for what you might be thinking, but paid well. And I deliver all over southeastern Montana, including a little town of Jordan, Montana. And because I'm from Iowa City. And going to this one bar every morning, it was the Stockman's Bar in Jordan, Montana, and you drop off the beer and stuff, and they'd be waiting for the invoice. And there were these 3 or 4 guys every day sitting at the sink at the bar. Every day, always there. And they would be like, damn government, stop, we can't do anything because of the government, we're farmers. And then one day they said, damn government, oh wait, did you get your check from the government? They were getting money from, you ever heard of CRP? It's crop reserves, a crop reserve program. The US government pays farmers to not grow crops and some things for like wetlands for animals. So they were getting money from the government to not grow and then complaining about the government. I just thought that was great. Damn government. But let me get to the punchline. So a couple years later, I think just at the end of my college career, but we're watching CNN, and there are a bunch of guys in Jordan who hold up on a farm. They're called the freemen. So kind of like militias are growing again. They're kind of like militia, and they refuse to pay taxes. And they were holed up in their farm, and they were surrounded by militia and FBI. In fact, Montana became the home of these crazy people who wouldn't pay taxes. And eventually, they had a big fight, and they were arrested. And they showed the freemen, and they were the same exact guys who were sitting at the bar complaining about the government when I was working. The very same people who were complaining about the government, and then they were the ones on TV. Now you might be thinking, no way, you saw that. Jordan's really small. Okay, so on that note, have a good day and eat your lunch. All right, I'm stopping recording. Goodbye.